Hello, one and all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan. Oh no, I was just thinking the other day, like I haven't fumbled one of these in like 6 months.
Oh no, you jinxed yourself.
I know. Hello, one and all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time is our Genius GM. Say hi, Genius GM.
Hello, it's me, Genius GM.
Oh, Connie, thank you so much. This is so exciting. Obviously, huge things going on for you. We've actually played a game together, which is also very cool. But obviously, the thing people want to know the most, are you regularly eating instant coffee as a snack now?
You know, this is so funny that this has become my legacy on Adventuring Academy because I'm actually not a coffee drinker at all. There's like no caffeine in my system. Though it was surprisingly not horrible. Like I would not be entirely against it.
That's fair. It is. It's just. I think it's. I think the legacy is because Brennan had such a strong reaction to it that it just became like the most clippable part of the episode, although certainly not the most interesting or introspective part, but the wildest that someone put instant coffee on a table.
I know. We trusted the process. That's what we get for trusting the process.
Yeah, the
but
real
honestly,
lesson
it
here,
made for a really great moment. So
it really did. I rewatched it today because I was like, it was just instant coffee, right? Like my brain was like, it's been so long since I've watched it. I'm gonna rewatch just that clip, and so like fired up Dropout and was like, search for coffee, and I was like, there it is, 50 minutes in. It's funny. Obviously, then you go on to talk about the more important things of like juice, such a good option as a snack at the table. I feel like, that conversation really got overshadowed by Brennan choking on instant coffee, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, as it deserves. That was truly a hilarious moment. But yeah, I am a juice apologist. I drink straight uncut juice from the tap. It's what I drink instead of coffee or tea.
Yep.
I just need the sugar to get me through the day. It's either juice or if I'm feeling a little frisky, I'll cut juice with a little bit of water. That's it.
Spicy.
A very boring life here.
Yeah.
But no, a juice does get me through recordings, gets me through streams, and I like to have a little meat snack, as I discussed on Adventuring Academy as well. I like having a little prosciutto, a little salami on the side. Yeah,
so good. Yeah,
I'm living in brunch time all the time.
Like I have caffeinated sparkling waters that just like I cannot stop drinking. I know, like I went to the dentist pretty recently, and they're like, "You drink a lot of soda," and I was like, "I don't drink any soda." And they're like, "Sparkling water," and I'm like, "I drink a lot of that." But I can't stop. I need the caffeine, and I don't like coffee, so.
I hear you. I absolutely hear you. The thing that I think kind of scared me off of anything sparkling is like the kidney stone horror stories. That scares me.
They're not good. They're so bad. I haven't had one since I've switched off of soda. Knock on wood. But like. Yeah, I've had a couple of them where where I was like, oh, it sounds nice laying down on the floor right now, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem like a great sign. That seems bad. It's like you try to convince yourself that like your lower back pain is just like you must have stood up weird earlier, and they're like laying down on the ground is a normal reaction to a small amount of pain. Like
no, absolutely. Listen, as an IBS sufferer, I'm right there.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah. It's good times. Kidney stones, IBS, we got it all. I became lactose intolerant in 2020 at 37 years old, which was a thing I didn't know you could do. Like
that's terrible.
Yeah. Just like
my sympathies with you. I became lactose intolerant at 21, actually, after a glorious adolescence.
Yeah,
eating pizza.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a thing that like just could happen as an adult. You're just like, nope, no more milk. Like,
no, it is such a thing. This might be absolute like garbage pop science, but I think I read somewhere, or maybe like I heard it on TikTok once. So I'm pretending that I read it in an article somewhere. That like apparently your allergies can change every like 7 years or something. It's like your entire body. I don't know. It's like something about it. It's like absolutely a thing.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it so much.
Bodies.
Also, they're weird.
Bodies, they're weird and we have to have them.
Yes. Speaking of, this is not a transition, but like I was trying to think like how do I transition to Godkiller off of that, because like that feels like a bodies were weird and we have to have them. Feels like a smooth transition to Godkiller. I don't have it, but like obviously you're so good at what you do. It's like it's
thank you.
genuinely unfair. I know when Haley Whipjack reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to be part of the Unprepared Casters charity stream?" I was like, "Yeah, of course I do." Like, what an honor! Are you sure you have the right person? And then they were listing off who was going to be on my hour, and when they said you, I was like, "Oh no!" But like, what do I do now? Like, there's someone too good playing with me.
Aw, shucks. No, I don't actually think that's true at all, because I genuinely do believe this. Everyone brings their own very special, very unique spin to the table whenever I share a table with a new person I've never played before. I'm always really excited to see like what the dynamic's going to be like. And I feel like we have such a good dynamic in our particular hour of the crawl.
Yeah,
it was a ton of fun.
It was super fun. I will say, like, going in, I had two goals. It was to make you laugh and to make Haley laugh, and I accomplished both of those things. And I was like, we nailed it. But yeah, like, it was super fun to get to like really organically come to. If you haven't watched the Unprepared Casters charity stream first hour yet, Connie's character and my character shared a little smooch. And wild magic. Yeah, as a wild magic surge made my gnome like 6 feet tall or something. In the moment, it was so much fun.
Yeah, no, and I think my character turned blue.
Yes, it? Yeah, you had turned blue earlier in that. I was using. I think I had convinced Haley to let me use prestidigitation to also be blue.
I think so,
show off for Ezra, but. Anyway, good times. This was supposed to be a transition to Godkiller. I don't know what happened. Godkiller, obviously, one-on-one, you and C. Thomas and just like the production value, incredible. Costumes, set design, everything. I mean, even like the introduction of like, hey, this is bad. Here are the content warnings. Like, even it feels like a Twilight Zone episode where like someone comes in to be like, the story you're about to see, like fully like that vibe. Obviously also Godkiller. Sorry, I should say Godkiller Last Hope, because Godkiller is the system. Last Hope is the actual game. This is like Never Stop Blowing Up. Never Stop is the system. Never Stop Blowing Up is the game. Because why not make it confusing? But
exactly. Branding.
Yes. Yeah, can you talk me through like Godkiller, where that came from? Obviously, like that one-on-one storytelling in TTRPGs, such a unique blend. I'm going to stop talking and let you go now.
Yeah, absolutely. So for folks who might not know, Godkiller Last Hope is Transplanar RPG's first in-studio production of an actual play. Very exciting stuff. It is a story about one player, the Godkiller, and one game master, God. And I happen to be the game master for this actual play series, and my partner, who is also my dramaturg and my producer, and one of the main cast members of Transplanar RPG, C. Thomas, is the Godkiller. In Last Hope, C. Thomas plays a Godkiller called Litany, the Vessel of Hatred, a person who was made to be a weapon crafted for a single purpose, to kill the immortal Emperor Longdu of the City of Heaven, who also happens to be their maker's sister. So kill their aunt. It's time to kill your aunt, who's also the god that rules everyone. So this is very much a story about cycles of trauma. It's a story about rage and vengeance, right? The steep, viciously transsexual, I would say, costs of becoming. We were talking about bodies and bodies being weird, right? We have a body. And for me, as like particularly specifically a trans artist making this work, I think any work about acts of becoming to me feel like inherently very queer, very trans, right? What it means to carve my own purpose out of literal blood, blade, and bone, which is what Litany was made from. Litany was made from a shard of their mother's rib, a drop of her blood, and a fragment of the sacred blade lodged inside their mother's chest, which Longdu used to kill her. but she's still alive. She's like a ghost of a god of a ghost, tethered to life by rage. That's it. The sheer force of her rage is what keeps her here. And she basically gestated Litany to carry out what she couldn't finish, which is to kill her sister. So this is very much a story about a weapon learning to be a person. In some ways, it's kind of a Godkiller tale told in reverse. If you're familiar with the game, its core themes, or if you've seen any aspect of Godkiller on any, if you've listened to Tightrope, right, on Unprepared Casters, or like any other Godkiller show, a lot of Godkiller narratives are about like kind of like a regular person or a mortal learning to grapple with their godhood, right? So as a Godkiller, typically you start out as just like a regular person and then you stumble into your powers somehow, somewhere. But in Last Hope, it's kind of the opposite of that. Litany was made from birth, created literally, birthed from a river of blood to slay this specific god, right? And at the very beginning of the pilot, they've already killed multiple gods, right? All to prepare like training wheels essentially to take down Emperor Longtu. So in a lot of ways,
at the beginning of the pilot, also an absolutely phenomenal intro with like,
I thank you.
Like you sitting at the table, see like back to you, you start an intro, they hop in with like bullshit. Like, was that? I mean, obviously, like you had to have planned part of it because he wasn't at the table, but like. How fast? Like, obviously, like there's a point very, very early on. I don't want to get into spoilers. Obviously, everyone should go watch it. But, like point very early on where like the first dice roll happens, and truly one of my favorite things where you're like, all right, here are 3 things. Are any of them true? And one of them's like, a god that doesn't want to kill you isn't nearby, or whatever it is. And it's like, no, there is one actively trying to kill you at this exact moment. That's why you're rolling. Yes. Yeah, how much of that had you planned out? Like how quickly did improv come in? Did you have sort of the structure of that intro laid out? Since obviously it was your first in-studio production.
Yes, so not scripted, but especially the intro was very much the word we like to use as choreographed. Drawing on C's literal like critical dance scholar background. They're also a dancer, a movement artist. And we had talked about how we wanted to open the show, right? We knew what the core themes of the show were going to be. We knew it was going to be 8 episodes, about an hour each. So there were like specific production standards we had to adhere to, right? To make sure that the story came out in a cogent and compelling way. But we were like, we want to do something different with the intro that we've not really seen done before in an actual play, particularly like an in-studio work, which is to also kind of softly break the fourth wall in some ways, because the intro you're referring to is C is standing upstage. I'm sitting at the table. C's back is turned to the camera. I'm sitting at the table as a GM and I'm looking at one of the cameras and addressing the audience. And I open with, "This is not a story about killing gods." And then C turns their head, looks at me, scoffs, and says, "Yes, it is." And I go on to address the audience. I don't turn back to C yet. And I say, "This is a story about XYZ. This is not a story about XYZ, XYZ." And C gets like visibly more distraught. They turn and they face me and they go, "No, yes, it is. This is my story. I'm the one telling it. I'm the Godkiller. This is what it's about," right? Turning to me, and we start to argue in a kind of like above the table, at the table, fourth wall breaking, but also embodied like character roleplay way. Like we're melding the boundaries of what is above the table knowledge and what characters at the table know. And then at some point during this argument between myself as God and C as player, I take out C's miniature of Litany, their character, and I hand it to them, and they place it on the table. I invite them to sit, and we begin. Like we plunge into the session. And that kind of opening was something C and I talked about. We wanted to open it in a fresh way, a different way, yes, but also a way that was deeply thematic to what the core of Last Hope was about, as well as the core themes of Godkiller, the game itself, of which I'm also the designer. The game is very much about interrogating power, yes, but in a deeply diegetic way. So in character power, yes, like the Godkiller as a character with the power to kill a god, but also the way I market the game is it's a game about killing your GM, right? So there are mechanics that allow the player to take complete narrative control. And there are mechanics that force the two of you as a duet to balance the power and the agency of a narrative between the two of you. For instance, a mortal move is a class of actions you can take within the game where you cannot roll. There are no rolls involved. You just answer 2 questions. The player gets to choose the first question they answer, and the GM takes whatever question that the player doesn't pick. And each of the questions, one of them always establishes a boon, like something cool that you get, and the other one always establishes a consequence. So the player gets to choose if they want to decide their own consequence or they want to decide the boon they get. And that kind of shapes the narrative and drives it forward regardless. So all these things about the balance of power between player and GM, the balance of power between God and Godkiller, these are things we wanted to kind of discuss and lay out, articulate in an artistic way to open the show.
Yeah, and it works. Like I said, it works so well. It's so compelling, just like really brings you in, and like it's not something I've ever seen before. Which I haven't seen. Look, I haven't seen enough actual plays because who's got the time? But I've seen a lot.
They tend to be really long. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting. That's something I saw recently. You had an interview with Screen Rant, right? Am I making that up? It's Screen Rant, right? Where you talked about like how some people had come in and been like, "Hey, like, is it Chaos Protocol season 1 is like 120 episodes or something like that?" Or
that's our very first
your very
campaign.
first, sorry, before Chaos
the second
Protocol.
Stranger.
Yes.
The whole thing was about 120. Yeah.
Yes, and and now like obviously much more condensed stories, and I feel like I've seen that trend really take shape over, outside of like Critical Role for obvious reasons, like really take shape of like much shorter chunks in actual plays of like, hey, here's our 10 episode season or whatever it is, like we're in, we're out. There was a question here. Is that something that like you think about as you're obviously developing your new, like the next series, like Chaos Protocol season 3 is on its way? Like how is that thought process for you?
For sure. I think it goes toward talking about long-term campaigns versus shorter-term campaigns and like a trend of it. I also think that there's a really important distinction between what in-studio production is able to support versus what remote production can do. The Second Stranger, it was so freaking long, and I love it. I loved every moment of it. I loved GMing it, and I think we were able to weave the narrative that we did because we had a lot of time to go deep and also explore the entire breadth of the narrative too, especially by the end of Arc 8, which was our final arc for The Second Stranger. I was GMing 8 players at the table, right? Like our cast kind of doubled from inception. But I think, and this was something I was noticing when doing Last Hope, which I've mentioned is our first ever in studio actual play. Up until that point, we've only ever done basically like Zoom APs, right? Like remote work, podcast based, and also like remote video work. Is the timeline for telling a story is a lot shorter. Like we don't get to have a week between every episode, right? To kind of like percolate on how our characters might respond to something that happened. We don't have months and months to weave a narrative over the course of like multiple weeks, like multiple seasons even. We kind of just had a weekend. We knocked 8 episodes out in 3 days, right? We did like 3-3-2 in terms of like how we shot the episodes. So that was kind of a practice in really truncated, like speed running basically an entire campaign. It's 8 episodes, which I would consider a mini series, right? Each episode is about an hour long, but we were able to basically tell an entire main story arc and take Litany from point A to like point Z for their character growth. In a lot of ways, we think of Last Hope as a prologue of sorts, because yes, there's like major, big, important plot things happening, of course, 100%, but also like Litany as a character has to grow from A to Z to be able to come to the conclusion that they do by the finale. And if we were able to make like a second season, that's when we would be able to really dive into like the meat of the world and like really do plot stuff. But the character has to get there first, right? The character has to have grown to a certain point to be able to affect the world in a way that we want them to, right? To play along the themes that we're interested in exploring. In terms of long-term and versus short-term campaigns too, something I think that remote work is uniquely positioned to do is to give you that kind of like breathing room, because you're not renting or owning or paying rent on, right, a studio space, right? Like there's not necessarily like in-studio realities that you have to adhere to. I think that's also why D20's like shooting schedule is so, rigorous, like pumping out content, and that Dimension 20 also being supported by Dropout's other work, I think is like a core part of their production pipeline in a way that it isn't for Transplaner and for like a lot of other, I think, more indie APs out there. So I love in studio work. I would love to keep doing in studio work, but the kinds of stories I think that we are able to tell right now, just given the realities of production and budgetary reasons, are going to have to be a lot more focused, a lot leaner, and a lot briefer, I think, for studio work in a way that I do miss. And which is why I think I would want to keep doing long-term remote work parallel to the studio work that I do.
Yeah.
Because I miss telling, and I like telling longer term stories.
Yeah, I mean, it is that sort of very strange balance, especially if, you know, you're producing actual plays versus obviously like a home game. Can go as long as you want, right? Like if it takes 10 years to finish your home game, who cares? Like as long as your players are having fun, like that's great. But, you know, if you're considering like, oh, is my audience going to be here for 10, you know, an episode a week for 10 years? Like that's a different story. Yeah, I should say, I guess we also haven't really plugged transplanar as a like concept in and of itself. That feels like a thing that we should also talk about, because it's not just Godkiller over there. There's lots of stuff that you do.
Absolutely, yeah. So Transplanar RPG is an all transgender, people of color led, dark fantasy actual play TTRPG channel telling stories set in an original, non-colonial, anti-Orientalist multiverse. It's the channel that I'm the showrunner and the game master for. And in addition to producing Godkiller Last Hope, Jordan, you've mentioned a few times the Chaos Protocol. That's our current flagship long-term remote campaign. It's a multi-system AP. So every arc we play a different game system, but we follow the same 3 core cast members throughout the multiverse. The Chaos Protocol follows 3 doomed agents of the Transplanar Reification and Nourishment Syndicate, or TRANS.
So good.
Which is a secret interplanar agency that literally serves Fate herself. And they bounce across different planes of the multiverse, playing different game systems and adopting basically different AU appearances. Like every arc, we commission a new artist for character art to answer distress calls from across the multiverse and serve Fate's will. And there's kind of like, obviously there's like mini contained plots within every season as they travel from plane to plane, but there's also like overarching, both like character-wide plot arcs, as well as like an overarching main plot as like a sinister, dark mystery comes to light.
Yeah, which you do so well. Every time I see like you pop up on TikTok, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be something juicy. It's gonna what wild things kind of got in store for players. Like it's gonna be fun. Yeah, I love trans is such a good like acronym. Just like it's so good.
It's the one pun I was able to convince C to let me keep.
Yeah.
for the core concept of the campaign. Yeah.
I in a home campaign play an artificer, whatever, the one that gets like your little robot buddy. And I named my robot buddy Mechanized Unit Responsible for Protection and Heroism, or MRF for short. And I was so proud of myself.
That's cute.
I was like, it's Murph. Now let's make the letters work, which is always how you want to run a joke. One of the things also that like I think super interesting about like obviously like I love that you're playing, you know, a bunch of different systems. As someone who has been slowly branching out from 5e to like play other systems, I find it so helpful when there is an actual play that I can like dive into to be like, all right, I'm going to watch these people play and then I'm going to kind of understand, because I'm not going to read the whole book, that's for sure. Like who's got the time? But yeah, I love that you're playing different systems in each of these arcs. And also obviously like you're designing systems as well. So like you have such a good eye, I'm sure, for, you know, like what works and what doesn't work, but specifically thinking of like actual play versus home play. So what do you have like things that like jump out at you like, oh, this works great in a home game, doesn't work great in an actual play, or like vice versa kind of stuff? From
like a system design point of view?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There are some systems that I think either by accident or by intention, perhaps a happy blend of both, are a lot better suited for actual play than others. One such example, I think a system that actually does really well in actual play is the Wild Sea, which is a system we use for Arc 1. And the system we used for Arc 2 is City of Mist. And there were some aspects of the system that I ended up homebrewing and kind of like hacking a little bit to streamline it a bit for the kind of play and narrative experience we wanted to have. And Arc 3, our system hasn't been announced yet, but I am eyeing a very popular system that folks in
Ooh.
TTRPG space really like. I'm eyeing it. I've never run it or played it before, actually, surprisingly, which I think is very surprising, especially given how much I love dark fantasy. But I'm eyeing it, and I'm likely also, similar to how I homebrewed and hacked City of Mist, I'm going to be homebrewing and hacking this system as well to just make it work better. And there are some like world building concerns as well for it. But yeah, I would say mechanics that are very, and what does this word even mean, right? I have a lot of game design thoughts about it, but just for the sake of being able to say what I mean, mechanics that support like a story forward kind of play, right? Not anything too wargamey or too crunchy, right? Anything where you have to like track a lot of different subsystems tends not to be great for actual play because it slows down adjudication, and it can kind of bog down play. Basically, any rules that get as little in the way of I want to do this thing. Okay, here's what happens when you try to do this thing. It's like as any core resolution system that can streamline that as much as possible is great for actual play.
Yeah, I talked to Carlos Luna pretty at length about the Never Stop system for Never Stop Blowing Up. And he described it as basically like the refrigerator box you get as a kid. So instead of like, not like the refrigerator, like the box you get for your Christmas present that you want to play in instead of your Christmas present.
Yes,
and like,
yes.
you know, the box is going to break because it is not designed to last. And so like they built a system that is designed to break. But like is supposed to be like super fun, gonna break, but real like a real short-lived burst of energy. And I was like, oh yeah, that's an actual play system. Like build a system that like, yeah, it's gonna break along the way, but hey, you're done in 10 or whatever it is, you know, but yeah, it's I think I find it such an interesting concept of like, oh yeah, this system, you know, lends itself really well, like you said, like Wild Sea lends itself so well to actual plays. Is that something also then, like when you're designing something like Godkiller, is your brain like split between like, oh, I'm gonna have to run this, I want to make sure it works really great, but other people are gonna run this in their home games, like?
That's a great question, because I personally, and I think this speaks toward my unique position and my specific perspective as a game designer, I actually don't feel any of that friction at all. And in fact, I've gotten like overwhelmingly very positive feedback on the Ashcan from people running it in their home games and really liking it. Because if you look at the Ashcan, if you look at the moves, the mechanics of Godkiller, it basically, and this was a intentional part of the design, it forces you to make interesting choices, right? Like I would say it's really hard to run a boring game of Godkiller because the moves you make are like, the outcomes were made to push the story forward in unforeseen, dire ways. So that obviously, I think, helps support interesting actual play because it helps you tell like a very epic, high stakes narrative. And it was also important to me to ground the mechanics in a really deeply nuanced emotional human heart as well. So it can support like a kind of depth as well, in addition to like heights of drama. Actually, when I was in pitch meetings and discussion meetings with various publishers, when I was trying to find a home for the full game of Godkiller, I was talking to various publishing companies in the TTRPG space. I ended up going with Evil Hat Productions, and part of the pitch process with them was to run an internal playtest, just so they could see how the game would run and if it would like fit what they were looking for in a game. So I ended up running the game for one of the owners of Evil Hat, and then waited a week and then heard back from them. They were like, yes, we would love to publish Godkiller. It was really great. Loved how it ran in the playtest. A piece of really positive feedback I got was from Fred Hicks, was this game I can tell even now can run so well for actual play, because the rules, like they run up and then they get the fuck out of the way. Like when you want to do something, the rules come up and they fuck it, they like dive out of the way so you can continue telling your story. And that was definitely part of my part of the design ethos, but I wasn't specifically thinking like, oh, how would this perform? I was thinking, how can these rules support spontaneous, dire, and emergent narrative in a way that is approachable both for like seasoned actors and for people who like are playing a TTRPG for the very first time, right? So I wanted this to have basically a low ceiling, quote unquote skill or experience floor rather, and also a really high ceiling. It was important for me that the game was able to support both.
Yeah, that's super cool. Also, such a cool story. I'm just like, yes. Then I ran a game for the owner, and so now they publish it. Like, what a flex. So I have a Patreon where I let people, not let people. That's a wild way to start the sentence. I ask people if they have questions that I can pass along. One person at least madly in love with your Pathfinder stuff, and it was please let them know I want more Pathfinder from them. I don't you don't have to say whether or not it's on the way or if you would ever do it again. I just thought you should know that people love everything you do.
That's really sweet of them. Yeah. I'm really proud to have written on Tianxia, which is their new setting guide. The world guide is what I worked on. That was just an absolute joy. I would love to do more stuff with Paizo / I could maybe see myself running something in Pathfinder. I just think in terms of for our main campaign, for the Chaos Protocol, it might be a system that we use for maybe an interlude, an interlude one-shot between arcs. I'm not sure if I'll use anything like Pathfinder or any of the other I don't use this in a disparaging way. D&D likes, basically, coming out from various publishers, like Tales of the Valiant, Daggerheart, right, in a response to the whole OGL fuck, right, that we cannot forget about. I'm not sure.
It was so recent too. It's so wild.
It's a year ago. Yeah. It's pretty wild. I'm not sure if I'll be using any of those. I might. It's not a completely closed and locked door, just because it's just so similar to D&D and the kind of not generic in a bad way, but a general an evergreen kind of medieval European-esque fantasy. I'm just not sure if that's kind of what I want to go back toward.
Very explicitly, yours is not a European
no.
medieval fantasy. It's there. I was going to say it's in the name, but it's not in the name. It's in the your description of non-colonial anti-Orientalist.
Yes.
I didn't want to switch the what's the word at the beginning of the
prefix?
Word? Thank you. Right, I know what words mean.
Parts of speech hard.
Yeah. Someone else wanted to know if you've ever scared yourself because your DMing and GMing is so scary. Have you ever scared yourself?
That's so funny. That's such a funny question. I've not scared myself while in the act of facilitating before, but there have been moments where I've been planning a session and I think of a twist and I go, I'll literally gasp out loud and I'll go, wait, is that too much? And I'll typically run it by C and they'll go, Connie, what the fuck is wrong with you? Do it. Do it, and here's how to make it worse. And I'll go,
that's what you want.
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah.
Yes, you need an enabler.
Yes, always. Yeah. It's such I'm so happy for you that you have C to run those things.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's the worst when you're oh no, the only people who know about my campaign are my players. Who do I talk to about this?
Agony. It's one of the top 3 GM agonies is not having someone to talk to about your evil plans. Because the people you would talk to are your friends who are playing in the game, and obviously you can't tell them because you don't want to spoil them.
Yes.
Yeah, so any GM that can, try to find someone who's not part of your campaign as your evil scheme buddy. I highly advise it. It is so rewarding.
Yeah, I got to talk to Casey McGeorge, who's the art director for D20, and we they want to get into set build or a mini building, map building for people, customized maps for people, because obviously that's what they do at D20, so makes sense, right? That they have that skill set, and so they're explain your campaign. And I was oh my God, I've never told anyone this because we're not far enough in the campaign for the players to know. I can't believe I get to tell someone all these secrets. It was such a joy of just all of this information pouring out of me into an email, and they wrote back. They were so kind about it and genuinely seemed interested. But they're and so this, and I'm well, it's not exactly the right detail, but I understand how you got there because I wrote so much that you didn't follow everything. Because it just came out of me in a way that I could not control because I'd never gotten to tell anyone about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best. Yeah, so we've talked a bit about like obviously like your like obviously you've helped with like Pathfinder stuff and
Mhm.
that new setting or is it, it's a new setting, right? I
Well,
haven't.
it's been written about with Paizo in the past. This is kind of like a revamp
Okay.
because the old setting had some racially insensitive stuff, right? And so they were like, let's do this again and let's do it better and let's do it right.
Yeah.
So they got like a team of like tons of like Asian writers of like all different backgrounds and cultural experiences and whatnot to like come on and write different parts of both the player guide and the world guide. Some people wrote on both, I think, but I wrote exclusively on the world.
Yeah, what I was really curious about is because you are so good at world building. Obviously, like I mean, you know, like start broad. Where do you start in your world building? Like, is it like I've got an idea? Like, is it different every time?
Well, for me, because I'm also an actual play person, it starts with uh where this world is going, what this world is going to serve. So am I building a world for an actual play one shot? Am I building a world for a home game that is going to go on for an indeterminate amount of time? Am I building a world for like a long-term actual play campaign like the Chaos Protocol? Because my approach to world building varies vastly depending on the context in which I'm building the world. So I think probably what I'm about to say, the advice I suppose is most helpful for people who are playing home games that go on for an indeterminate amount of time. So usually for that, I start with for me, core themes and conflicts I'm interested in exploring. So when I think about a world, oftentimes I think people are inspired by something that they just watched, or like a piece of media that they're obsessed with currently, right? Because I'm constantly seeing on Twitter like, oh my god, I just watched like, for example, The Acolyte. Now I want to run a game that's like based on The Acolyte, right? Or like, oh, I'm really into dragon writers because I'm watching House of the Dragon, so I want to be
Loki's
in
TVA, like
exactly
deeply inspirational. Yeah.
Yes. Actually really funny. It was a comp, but TVA actually was not a huge inspiration for the world building of the Syndicate, even though they're two very, I think, on the surface, very similar concepts, right? This kind of like interstitial, like interplanar agency there to like keep the balance, right? But the way in which I built the Syndicate was, I think, is like very different from the TVA. But in terms of where to start, I start like with a core concept that usually has some like tangible aesthetic to it, like a genre to it, right? So like, for example, I'm interested in like running a vampire hunter / vampires campaign. I would love it to be dark fantasy, and you know, I would love for it to feel like a blood drenched masquerade ball. Like those are like the vibes I want. I want like high society with like vampires hiding behind masks. Oh yes, like there's the concept of masquerade. Maybe we could play VTM. Oh, but I want it to be like medieval. So maybe we could like reskin VTM, but like put it out of a modern setting, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's usually where I start with like the cool, fun, glamorous parts of it. And then I drill deeper into what the themes of the world might be. So like, okay, vampires, masks. So this is about like monstrosity, right? There's like ideas of monstrosity that are coming up, ideas of having to hide your true self, ideas of power, of course, like big words that I'll drill down deep into and get specific with later. And then I start thinking about conflicts. So like, what are the core problems of this world? And that's kind of where the PCs can come in, because it's kind of like, how do the PCs fit into the world, and also how are they uniquely equipped to tackle the problems in some way? Because I always think of my PCs as like the main characters of whatever campaign I'm running, as the protagonists, which is different from heroes, right? It's it's who the story is about. So your PCs could be like street urchins with no power, and you have no political, you're not chosen ones, but you're still the protagonists, right? So the story has to center on you, and what you care about as a player has to fucking matter in some way, right? It has to produce genuine consequences, positive and negative. So that's kind of big picture stuff. And then I start narrowing down on, okay, I have a pretty good idea of like the aesthetics of this world, the genre of this world, the core conflicts of this world, and like the big picture themes of this world, and also who the heroes might be, right? Who the protagonists might be, the PCs. Now I have to think about, where are we going to start? What are like the tangible, actual, like actionable places where we begin in session 1, right? Because I am very much a proponent of laying down the track as we go. So I have a general idea of like kind of where the campaign might head, but the specifics of how we get there, I don't necessarily pre-plan. I like to prep situations, not solutions. So that's a really important part of me, my ethos as a GM, to support like spontaneous and emergent play as well, both in APs and in my home game too. So that's a lot of stuff. And a lot of this is also like an ongoing back and forth conversation with my players. I involve them during pretty much every step of the process. Sometimes when I'm like stuck between premises, I'm like, oh, it could be really, I could really love like a sci-fi horror survival campaign right now. Ooh, or like a dark fantasy medieval vampire thing. Ooh, or like an urban fantasy werewolf / shifters thing. I'm kind of torn. I'll like pitch it to my players and have them vote. You know, and the one that people like the most, or where they'll find a way to combine ideas, I'll take and I'll run with it. Like I'll give them like a menu basically of ideas, and then I'll take what they like and I'll spin a session 0 sheet out of it. So I'll pause there because that was a lot.
No, it's fantastic. I got to like I love like cooperative world building. It's so much fun. It's like I ran a home game that went like 7 years. We went 1 to 20 in 5e, and now we're playing Pathfinder for campaign 2, like same world 30 years later, which is just like one of my favorite little toys to play with, of just like, hey, look, it's the consequences of your actions from campaign 1, and now your new character's dealing with it. Like,
I love that.
Yeah. But like one of the things that was really fun is one of my players wanted to play like a red panda. A red panda that's there's no like just a humanoid red panda, and I was like, yeah, of course. And they're like, I'm from the Feywild. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, all right, well, we're starting in this big city, and I'm like, what if Central Park style, there's a massive forest in this city, but it's just a split between the Feywild and like the material plane, and like the like forest has sprung out. I'm like, this is so wild. This is delightful. Like
I love that.
The thing I would have
it's
never
like Republic City vibes.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Yeah, like the thing I never would have thought of. Even having seen Korra, like just like not an idea in my brain. It's like my player said, I'm like, this is great. This is perfect. I love this so much. People can go on a walk in a forest that is always dusk at any point. Like what fun. You mentioned session 0. Now what is it? Obviously, like session 0 is incredibly important as well. What are you, a master of the art form, running in a session 0?
I also, before I answer that, I just have to point out that you have been like buttering me up this entire interview with these like incredible compliments.
Correct.
That I feel I could not be more buttered. I feel like a baguette. So thank you. But first of all, I love that you built your players' desires like into the literal physical architecture of the world. That is excellent. That is like the peak of GMing for me, because that shows that you listen to your players, and that's what you care about the most, right? That they are the center of your world, insofar as their desires will literally shape what the world looks like as well. It's why, like you've mentioned, I'm so passionate about collaborative world building. I'm a writer as well. I like writing prose. I like writing fiction. If I want to just completely control what a world is like, I'll write a book about it. I'll write flash fiction. I'll write a short story, right? But that's not why I GM. I GM so I can have ideas, but I also want to see what my players bounce off of and come up with as well. Like that is what makes this fun for me. And I think we don't have to talk about that necessarily right now, but that is, I think, what
we can talk about that. Like it's right? The best.
Yeah, I think there's sometimes like GMs who are very like possessive of their worlds, and they worry that their players are gonna like I think it fundamentally is about a lack of trust. They worry that the players are gonna like fuck up their world or like not respect their world, right? So they're like, I actually don't think that's how that works in my world, right? Because they have a very, very restrictive or rigid idea of how things would work in their world, and because they're God, because they're the GM, what they say
I want
goes.
Nothing more than my players to fuck up my world. That's exactly what I want to happen.
That is exactly what I want. Yes, that's exactly where I'm at. Like literally the dedication on the Godkiller Ashcan, which I will replicate for the full game, is this game is for C. Thomas, the eternal Godkiller of my heart. Never stop fucking with my plans.
Yeah.
Because that is what I love the most as a GM, is when a player fucks with my plans. plans. I love that. Please keep doing that.
The best.
Especially in a way that's thematic that we all sign up for, right? Which are the kinds of people I invite to play at my tables. But going back to your session zero question, which is also great. I love session zeros. And I love session zeros insofar as Transplanar is kind of notorious for having so many session zeros. Before the Chaos Protocol, like Arc 1, Episode 1, like we streamed it, we had like 9 or 10 session zeros with the cast. No, we actually did. The first one, which was like a session -9 all the way to session 0, right? Like session -9 was an interest check when we were like casting. I like invited the cast on. We were like, these are da-da-da. Do you want this? These are the other people involved. This is what the rates are like, blah, blah, blah. They were like, yes, yes, yes. Got them on. And then the next one, we weren't even talking about Kerrigan. We're just getting to know each other. And we talked about what we wanted to get out of the show. And I talked about, this is what the show is about. This is how I run Transplanar. These are the core themes of the campaign, right? That you all already knew about the interest check. Like, how are we feeling about that still? Let's talk about safety tools. Okay. And then the next session 0 after that, introduce them to the world. Like, here's the world that I've got. Here's some core questions about the world that I would like you all as the players to answer. And here, kind of like the fun homework I left them was like, come up with like a few character concepts that we can all talk about together and pick together. It was important for me that they would come up with like multiple ideas so we can kind of like see which one would fit into the dynamic best. And also, like, if they had like a favorite idea, like, of course we would honor that too. And then more session zeros came on to like flesh out the characters, to talk about the system we were going to do for Arc 1, to talk about the overall trajectory, the big picture themes of the campaign. And then another session 0 to talk about Arc 1 specifically, now that we're done talking about the campaign as a whole, right? Because we had to build out the characters and set up all of their arcs that would support long-term play across 8 arcs, which they all knew was going to go on for like at least 2.5 years. Because that's kind of what happened with Discipline Stranger. So there were concerns of like, not concerns, but like questions, right? About how am I going to build a character that I'm able to play for 2.5 years across like over 100 episodes and still feel like I have a lot of new places to go with this character over the course of like arcs and arcs and arcs and arcs, right? So it was important for us to be able to support them in that. And that's where C comes in as a dramaturg. They really help facilitate that process. They take like, their role as dramaturg is, what do you want to do with this character? Here's how I can help you get there. Right? Never telling them what to do with their character, but more so just like any storyteller with any craft in any medium, what is the effect you're hoping to achieve with this art? And how can we help you get there? Right? Like, that's their role as the dramaturg. As for my side of the session 0, actually, my process is typically even more involved for a one-shot than it is for like a long-term campaign. There was a lot of onboarding work for like starting up the Chaos Protocol, but now our arc-to-arc session 0s, we kind of already know who the characters are, and we kind of like have a general sense of what the themes are going to be like for each arc going into them. That's what we talk about, and we do like a safety tool refresher, of course. We also have like mid-arc session 0 check-ins. Like at the midpoint of each arc, we have a session 0, and we talk about safety. We talk about like how things are going, just kind of like a pulse check, right? But what I really like to do for my home games and one-shots that I run is put together a little session 0 sheet. And what I have on this sheet is everything. It starts with like a check-in and then safety, right? Just like safety stuff, the tools we're going to use, lines of veils, etc. And then the really fun stuff, which are thematic questions that I write. Because at this point, when we have the session 0, we have already locked in a premise. And we've already locked in like an overall tone. So everyone going in knows like, oh, we're going to play like sad space cowboys, right? Like they already like kind of like know the vibe of it going in, but they don't know the specifics. So this is when I tell them the specifics and I ask questions that are pointed toward the theme. Like, for example, each of you has like a scorned ex. Like, what did you do wrong in that relationship, right? It, pointing toward like a one shot or a campaign that might be about like love, right? And like the difficult costs and also incredible rewards of love, stuff like that. So a list of these thematic questions and also a list of world building questions that I invite my players to co-create the world along with me. So like in session 0, I'll ask, for example, okay, you're all a group of like space pirates, right? One of you go around and like each of you pick a question to answer. What's the name of your pirate ship, your space pirate ship, right? Who who did you fuck over during your last gig and how, right? Stuff like that. And they'll immediately start coming in and they'll start coming up with NPCs of their own accord. They'll basically start like helping me write the plot, right, for me. But this also helps them get engaged from the jump, because that's often a question I get on my like GM advice, like TikToks and whatnot, is like, how do I keep my players engaged? My players don't give a fuck. Like they always go south of the plot hook. And I'm like, well, here's a way to get them engaged, is like give them a personal character stake in the plot you're trying to throw at them. That, and you should all already be on the same page about we're here to play the story together, right? Like that's kind of step one.
Yeah, I often see those TikToks that make me so sad when someone's like, or like usually it's Reddit posts where it's like, Reddit posts make me sad generally speaking, because that's a terrible place.
Same. No, it is.
But like it'll be like, my players hate me and my game. What do I do? And it's like, I don't think there's a lot you can do. I think you got to find new players. Like
here's my maybe. I say hot take, but I honestly think it's like an ice cold take. I think that 99% of problems at a TTRPG table boil down to the same issue, which is opposing desires. Even if you're not aware of it, you want different things out of the game. That's fundamentally what it is. A player that doesn't give a fuck about your plot, like, why don't they care about your plot? That's because that's not what they signed up for. There's a reason why they're bored, right? And sometimes that reason isn't your fault. In fact, you could be doing everything perfectly, someone could still be bored, and that's because this isn't the table that's right for them, right? So sometimes, honestly, the only solution is to part ways, or to figure out a way, or you could try to compromise, but then you'll always know that there's that tension, right? So like that's my take. Like, and so much of this could be, if not solved, at least illuminated and visibilized through more tables, knowing how to talk to each other. I think
having 10 session zeros. That's the key.
10 session zeros minimum. 20 if you want to really get a gold star. But it's about, this sounds so trite, but it is about communication. And what makes communication possible is trust, honesty, and respect at the table. And honestly, players that are emotionally developed, I'm being so for real here, like players that are emotionally developed enough to be able to have tough conversations. Because I'm a huge proponent of safety, right? Like safety tools, yes, always at the table, 100%. And it's my job as a GM to make sure that they're brought up and that they're enforced. But safety tools are only as effective as the table that uses them, right? You could use X cards from dawn until dusk. You could have X cards at the table, talk about them from dawn until dusk. It doesn't matter if no one uses it. Doesn't matter if no one actually respects the safety tools that we have all agreed to utilize, right? So I've seen a lot of like, both personally and also like from afar, a lot of this breakdown of communication that I think just speaks toward like a fundamental lack of trust and a lack of respect at the table from everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. When I started playing that original game, like I didn't have any concept of safety tools. Like it was, I was just diving in. Like I'd listen to the Adventure Zone, and I was like, I think I could do this. I say that and I feel bad because I'm like, it feels like I'm insulting Griffin's incredible work. But like what I mean is like when I first like thought of the concept of like GMing, I thought it was you are a type A person. You have every possible scenario planned for, everything like is ready to go. Like you have your notes and like there's not a thing that you could do that could be surprised. Like you are ready. And then I listened to Balance and I was like, oh, it's improv. Oh, okay. I could do that. Like I can't do the other thing, but I can say yes and when my players do something crazy. No problem. And so like it recently, like obviously like spending more time in the community, like I started learning about safety tools, and so I had like introduced them to my players like after we had started a game of or in a campaign. And I'm very blessed in that I don't think we've ever had to use anything because they're all like incredibly close friends, and like the sort of thing that you would expect to have happen of like, there's a reason you're good friends. You're not going to like push past, and you would recognize when like something is like tension in another good friend of yours, but also how important it is that those safety tools are still there and like available.
In case you need them, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm right there with you. Actually, I was inspired to get into APs because of balance as well, and because of Blake Griffin's incredible GMing.
Yeah.
But I'm literally right there in the same boat with you. When I first started GMing, it was with D&D, and it was for home games, right? I was DMing home campaigns. I didn't use safety tools because I didn't know what they were, right? So like. Shit would happen where like I would pull some shit, and actually C has been playing in my campaign since when I first started GMing. We met in college, actually in undergrad. I ran like a college campaign that they were in. I like pulled some shit, and I remember they were like, we had no idea what like X and O, rewind, red, yellow, blue, green were at all. But they went, can that not have happened? Because that makes me actually deeply sad in a way that isn't fun. And I went, oh my god, yes, of course. How about this instead? And then we just like took it from there. And that was us using safety, even though we didn't have formal tools, right? So I think that's kind of what I mean by safety tools are only as good as the table that uses them. Like it's kind of like your mileage may vary, right? So like when I sometimes see like people who are anti-safety tool being like, well, my table doesn't need them. We just use a little thing called talking to each other. Ever heard of that? And I'm like, that's safety. I'm like, I don't know how to break this to you, dude. Like, that's safety. Sorry, but you're actually an ally. Like, what to say?
Whoops, you're an ally. Sorry.
Yeah. Safety tools are just a way to codify and officialize communication, right? And like knowing how to talk to each other. They're especially useful if you're playing with strangers, right? Because then you're like, I don't know how to talk to you, so I'm just gonna wave this card, right? Like, and that's useful, very useful shorthand. But yeah, I think that as long as tables are like fully communicative with each other, like know each other's boundaries and hold trust and respect with each other and know how to work through conflict with each other, like honestly, like you could or could not use safety tools. Like I will always at my tables always use safety tools just because I find them extremely useful. But that's kind of what safety tools are. A tool. They're trying to help produce a particular outcome and create a particular kind of table culture, right? There are many different ways to get there, right? And safety tools are just a very reliable way to do so.
Yes, absolutely. 1,000,000% agree, as I do with everything that you've ever said ever about everything.
Oh,
You're always right. Yeah, I'll say like this is now entirely unrelated, but because we are fully at time, and now I just want to get in one last plug of like a thing.
Yes, please.
One of my favorite things to do, because I GM'd for a long time, and then I've started like some of my friends in that campaign have started DMing their own campaigns as well, which is amazing because then I get to play, and that's also very fun. And oh boy, baby, do I love sending a text after a session to be like, that was so much fun. Just send your, hey, if you're a player, send your DM text how much fun you're having.
Yes.
It means the world.
So, such a low lift, high reward thing to do. Because I swear to you, like so many GMs are like, I hope they had fun. I'm not sure. Just send them a text. Let them know that you did have fun. It will literally make your GM's day.
Yeah, absolutely. Connie, this couldn't have been more delightful.
Yes.
If in some bizarre look, I won't say like there's no way that no one follows me, like doesn't follow you, because I discovered that someone didn't follow Whipjack who followed me, and I was like, but where have you been, right? Like, how is that possible? But anyway, if people want to find you on the internets, where can they find you? Where can they find Transplaner? Give us the details.
Absolutely. If you love queer drama and or black-hearted apocalyptica and or you're enticed by a premise like it's like the L Word meets Cthulhu, so a lot of queerness meets world-ending horrors, you'll love Transplaner. So you can find me, Connie Chang, across the internet at by Connie Chang. That's BYCONNIECHANG. I am primarily on Twitter and TikTok at those handles, and you can find my channel, which produces Godkiller Last Hope, The Chaos Protocol, and all 120 finished episodes of The Second Stranger if you're the kind of purist that likes to start from the very beginning. You can find Transplaner across the internet at Transplaner RPG. There are no E's in that. Sometimes people spell Transplaner with some E's. There are no E's, all A's. Trans as in transgender, and then planar, PLANAR, as in interplanar travel, RPG at the end. So we're on Twitter, we are on YouTube, those are our two main places, and Twitch, where we stream weekly Saturdays, new episodes of Last Hope, 8 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. So check us out.
Thank you so much. This was such a delight. I could spend hours talking to you about all of these things. You must come back. Oh, one last question for you. I, at this point, have interviewed 40 people who work for
Wow.
Dropout in some way. Do you
so
think
many
you
people.
count as 41 because you've been on Adventuring Academy? I think you do.
You know what? I'll give that to you. I'll
Great.
give it to you so you can add it to your tally.
I'm going to scratch out the question mark next to 41, and we're going to count it.
There we go. Yes, it'll be counted.
Yes.
As a contractor, yes. If that counts, then bam,
That
put
counts.
it down.
It counts. I mean, most of them are contractors, so. Connie, thank you so much. Absolutely delightful. I don't know how to end interviews, so I'm just going to hit stop recording.
Stop recording.